The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training facility as recruits filed into the briefing room. Among them walked Sarah Chen, a quiet girl of 19 who seemed almost invisible next to her louder, more confident peers. She kept her eyes down, clutching a worn notebook that contained everything she had studied about marksmanship theory for the past 6 months. The other recruits barely noticed her. They were too busy talking about their hunting experiences, their time at shooting ranges, and their dreams of becoming elite soldiers. Sarah had none of these stories to share. She had grown up in a small farming town where the closest thing to excitement was the annual harvest festival. Her father worked at the grain elevator, her mother taught elementary school, and Sarah had spent most of her childhood reading books in the town library. But something had drawn her to the military. Maybe it was the desire to prove herself, or perhaps the need to escape the limitations of small-town life. Whatever the reason, she had enlisted the day after her 18th birthday, much to her parents' surprise and concern. Range Officer Martinez stood at the front of the room, his weathered face showing the marks of 30 years in the service. He had seen thousands of recruits come through these doors, and he could usually tell within the first week who would make it and who would wash out. His eyes swept across the room, taking note of the confident ones who sat up straight and the nervous ones who fidgeted with their equipment. "Today we begin marksmanship training," Martinez announced, his voice carrying the authority of decades. "Some of you think you know how to shoot because you've hunted deer or shot tin cans off fence posts. Let me tell you something right now. Military marksmanship is different. It's about precision under pressure, consistency in all conditions, and the mental discipline to hit your target when lives depend on it." Sarah absorbed every word, writing notes in her careful handwriting. She noticed that many of her fellow recruits had stopped listening, probably thinking they already knew everything they needed to know about shooting. The group moved to the outdoor range, where targets were set up at various distances. Martinez explained the basics: breathing, sight alignment, trigger control. Sarah listened intently while others seemed impatient to start shooting. "We'll start at 100 yards, Martinez called out. "Basic marksmanship position, prone supported. You have 20 rounds. Let's see what you can do." The first recruit stepped up to the firing line. His name was Tommy Rodriguez, and he had been bragging all morning about growing up on a ranch in Texas where he had been shooting since he was 8 years old. He settled into position with confidence, adjusted his rifle, and began firing. The first shot rang out across the range. Miss. The second shot also missed the target completely. Tommy's confidence began to waver as shot after shot failed to find its mark. By the time he had finished his 20 rounds, he had managed to hit the target only 5 times, all in the outer rings. Martinez made a note on his clipboard without comment. "Next," he called. One by one, the recruits took their turn at the firing line. Some performed better than others, but none were particularly impressive. Most managed to hit the target paper, but few found the center rings with any consistency. The morning wore on, and Martinez's expression grew more concerned with each mediocre performance. Jessica Williams, a former high school athlete who had joined the military to pay for college, managed to hit the target 12 times out of 20. Her grouping was scattered, but at least she was consistent in hitting the paper. She walked away from the firing line with a slight smile, thinking she had done well. Marcus Thompson, who had spent his teenage years hunting in the mountains of Colorado, fared slightly better with 14 hits. His shots were all over the target, but he had at least kept them on the paper. He nodded to his friends as he returned to the group, confident that his outdoor experience had given him an advantage. The pattern continued through the morning. Some recruits hit the target 8 or 9 times, others managed 12 or 13 hits. A few exceptional shooters reached 15 or 16 hits out of 20 rounds. But none came close to what Martinez would consider truly accurate shooting. As the sun climbed higher and the morning grew warmer, Sarah watched each shooter carefully. She studied their positions, their breathing patterns, the way they held the rifle. She noticed small details that others missed. How some shooters rushed their shots, how others held their breath too long, how many failed to follow through after pulling the trigger. When her turn finally came, Sarah felt every eye on her. She was the last recruit to shoot, and by now everyone knew she was the quiet girl who never spoke up in group discussions. Some of the other recruits exchanged glances, probably wondering if she had ever held a rifle before. Sarah approached the firing line with steady steps. She had never fired a military rifle before, but she had spent countless hours studying the theory. She understood the physics of ballistics, the importance of consistent positioning, and the mental aspects of marksmanship that many shooters ignored. Martinez watched her carefully as she settled into the prone position. He noticed immediately that her position was textbook perfect. Elbows placed correctly, body aligned with the target, rifle held with just the right amount of pressure. She took her time adjusting the sling and checking her sight picture. "Whenever you're ready," Martinez said, his voice neutral but his interest clearly piqued. Sarah took a deep breath, let half of it out, and held. She aligned the front sight post perfectly in the rear sight aperture, placing the tip of the post at the bottom of the bullseye. Her finger found the trigger, and she began the slow, steady squeeze she had read about in every marksmanship manual she could find. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the range. Sarah worked the bolt smoothly, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a fresh round. She settled back into her shooting position, checked her sight picture, and fired again. One by one, Sarah's shots rang out across the range at measured intervals. She never rushed, never hesitated. Each shot followed the same precise routine. Breathe, align, squeeze, follow through. The other recruits watched in growing amazement as Sarah demonstrated a level of consistency they had not seen all morning. When the 20th shot echoed across the range, Sarah carefully made her rifle safe and remained in position while Martinez walked downrange to check her target. The range fell silent, except for the distant sound of birds and the whisper of wind through the grass. Martinez reached the target and stopped in his tracks. He had seen thousands of targets in his career, but what he saw now made him blink twice to make sure he was reading it correctly. He pulled the target from its frame and examined it closely, counting the holes. 20 shots, 20 hits. But more than that, all 20 shots were grouped in the center ring of the target, creating a cluster no larger than a man's fist. It was the kind of shooting that Martinez usually saw only from experienced marksmen with years of training. He walked back to the firing line carrying the target, his expression unreadable. The recruits gathered around as he held up the paper for everyone to see. A murmur of disbelief ran through the group. 20 for 20, Martinez announced, his voice carrying a note of professional respect that had not been there earlier. All in the black. Sarah stood quietly as her fellow recruits stared at the target. She felt no particular pride or excitement, only the satisfaction of applying theory correctly and seeing the expected results. To her, it seemed logical that careful study and proper technique would produce accurate shooting. Tommy Rodriguez, who had bragged all morning about his shooting experience, stared at the target in disbelief. "How did you do that?" he asked Sarah. "Have you been shooting your whole life?" Sarah shook her head. "I've never fired a rifle before today," she said quietly. "I just read about it." The statement hung in the air like a challenge to everything the other recruits thought they knew about marksmanship. Jessica Williams, who had felt proud of her 12 hits, now looked at her own target with new eyes. Marcus Thompson, the experienced hunter, wondered how years of outdoor shooting had prepared him less than Sarah's theoretical study. Martinez studied Sarah with new interest. In 30 years of training recruits, he had rarely seen natural ability combined with such obvious dedication to learning. Most exceptional shooters he had known were either naturally gifted athletes who picked up skills quickly, or experienced hunters who had developed their abilities over many years. Sarah seemed to be something different, a student who had approached marksmanship as a science to be understood rather than an art to be practiced. "Interesting," Martinez said, making notes on his clipboard. "Very interesting indeed." The morning training session ended with equipment cleaning and a brief discussion of the next day's activities. As the recruits filed back toward the barracks, Sarah found herself walking alone again. The brief moment of attention had already faded, and her fellow soldiers had returned to their usual conversations about weekend plans and complaints about military food. But Martinez watched her go with thoughtful eyes. He had seen something on the range that morning that went beyond beginner's luck or natural talent. Sarah had demonstrated the kind of systematic approach to shooting that took most people years to develop. Her technique was not just good, it was fundamentally sound in ways that suggested deep understanding rather than mere imitation. That evening, Martinez sat in his office reviewing the day's scores. Sarah's target lay on his desk next to a stack of reports from other training companies. He had made a decision that would change the quiet girl's life, though neither of them knew it yet. He picked up his phone and dialed the number for Advanced Marksmanship Training Command. When the duty officer answered, Martinez identified himself and asked to speak to Colonel Harrison, the commander of the military's elite sniper school. "Sir, I have a recruit I think you should know about," Martinez began. "Shot 20 for 20 on her first day with a service rifle. Never fired a military weapon before in her life." There was a pause on the other end of the line. 20 for 20? Colonel Harrison's voice carried skepticism. "At what distance?" 100 yards, but that's not the impressive part," Martinez continued. "The impressive part is how she did it. Perfect technique, perfect mental approach. I've been training shooters for 30 years and I've never seen anything like it." Another pause. "Send me the scores and your evaluation," Harrison said finally. "If she's as good as you say, we might want to take a look at her." Martinez hung up the phone and began writing his report. He described Sarah's performance in detail, noting not just her accuracy but her approach to shooting. He wrote about her systematic preparation, her attention to detail, and the quiet confidence she had displayed under pressure. As he wrote, Martinez found himself wondering about the quiet girl from the farming town. He had seen natural shooters before, but Sarah seemed to be something more. She had approached marksmanship like a scholar approaches a difficult problem, with patience, study, and methodical application of principles. The next morning would bring new challenges, and Martinez was curious to see how Sarah would perform when the difficulty increased. But already he suspected that he had discovered something rare. A recruit who combined natural ability with the intellectual discipline to become truly exceptional. In the barracks that night, Sarah cleaned her rifle with the same careful attention she had shown on the firing line. Her bunkmates chatted about the day's training, but few mentioned her performance. To them, she was still just the quiet girl who kept to herself and studied while others socialized. Sarah didn't mind the lack of attention. She had come to the military with specific goals: to challenge herself, to develop new skills, and to find out what she was truly capable of achieving. The day's success on the rifle range was satisfying, but she viewed it as just the beginning of a much longer journey. She opened her notebook and began reviewing the principles of long-range shooting, preparing for whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. Outside, the base settled into evening quiet, but Sarah continued to study by the dim light of her reading lamp, determined to master every aspect of the skills she had begun to discover within herself. 3 weeks after Sarah's remarkable first day on the rifle range, a black sedan pulled up to the training facility. Colonel Harrison stepped out, his uniform bearing the distinctive insignia of Advanced Marksmanship Command. He had come to see the recruit Martinez had described in his report. Sarah knew nothing of the colonel's visit. She had spent the past 3 weeks excelling in every aspect of marksmanship training while maintaining her quiet, studious approach to military life. Her shooting scores had remained consistently perfect, but she had also shown exceptional progress in fieldcraft, camouflage, and tactical movement. Martinez met Colonel Harrison at the company headquarters. The two men had served together years earlier, and Harrison trusted Martinez's judgment completely. Still, the claims in the report seemed almost too good to believe. "She's been shooting perfect scores for 3 weeks, Martinez reported as they walked toward the range. "Not just good scores, perfect. Every single round finds the target, and most of them are in the X ring. At 300 yards, she's shooting groups smaller than my fist." Harrison nodded but remained skeptical. "What about her mental state? Some people shoot well on the range but fall apart under pressure." "That's what makes her different," Martinez replied. "The more pressure we put on her, the better she performs. Last week I had her shoot while we played recordings of combat sounds. Other recruits fell apart. She shot her best score of the week." They reached the range where the day's advanced training was already underway. Sarah lay in the prone position at the 500-yard line, her rifle steady on its bipod. Through his binoculars, Harrison could see her target downrange, a standard silhouette that looked impossibly small at that distance. Sarah's breathing was controlled and rhythmic. She had learned to read wind conditions by watching grass movement and feeling air currents on her skin. The afternoon breeze was gusting from left to right at approximately 8 miles per hour, requiring a slight adjustment to her point of aim. She settled the crosshairs slightly left of center to compensate for wind drift and began her trigger squeeze. The rifle fired with its familiar crack, and Sarah immediately worked the bolt to chamber another round. Through the spotting scope, Martinez watched the bullet impact in the exact center of the target's chest area. Shot 1. Center mass, the range instructor called out. Sarah fired 9 more rounds in quick succession, each shot carefully aimed and deliberately placed. When she finished, she made her rifle safe and remained in position while the instructor called the results. 10 rounds, 10 hits, all in the vital zone, the instructor announced. Average group size 3 inches. Harrison lowered his binoculars and looked at Martinez with new respect. A 3-inch group at 500 yards was exceptional shooting by any standard. For a recruit with less than a month of training, it was extraordinary. How long has she been shooting at extended ranges? Harrison asked. 2 weeks, Martinez replied. We started her at 300 yards after her first week. She adapted to each distance like she'd been doing it for years. After the morning training session, Martinez approached Sarah as she cleaned her rifle. Chen, report to the company office when you're finished here. Sarah nodded and continued her methodical cleaning routine. She had developed her own system for rifle maintenance that ensured her weapon remained in perfect condition. Every part was cleaned, inspected, and lubricated according to a precise schedule that she had created after studying technical manuals on weapon care. When she arrived at the company office, she was surprised to find 2 officers waiting for her. Martinez she knew, but the colonel was unfamiliar. Sarah came to attention and waited for instructions. At ease, soldier, Colonel Harrison said, studying her carefully. I'm Colonel Harrison from Advanced Marksmanship Command. I've been hearing interesting things about your shooting. Sarah relaxed slightly but remained alert. Yes, sir. Sergeant Martinez tells me you've never missed a shot in 3 weeks of training. Is that accurate? Yes, sir. I've hit every target I've aimed at. Harrison exchanged a glance with Martinez. What do you think accounts for your success? Sarah considered the question carefully. I study the fundamentals, sir. Shooting is about consistency and precision. If you understand the principles and apply them correctly, the results are predictable. Have you given any thought to what you'd like to do after basic training? I want to continue developing my marksmanship skills, sir. I believe I can become much better than I am now. Harrison smiled for the first time since arriving. I think you're right about that. How would you feel about attending some specialized training after you complete basic? Sarah's expression didn't change, but Martinez could see the interest in her eyes. What kind of specialized training, sir? Advanced marksmanship, long-range precision shooting, the kind of training we give to our best snipers. The word hung in the air between them. Sarah had read about military snipers in her studies, but she had never considered that she might have the ability to join their ranks. Snipers were elite soldiers, chosen from the very best marksmen in the military. I would be honored to attend such training, sir, Sarah said quietly. Harrison nodded. Complete your basic training first. If you maintain your current performance level, we'll talk again. That evening, news of Sarah's conversation with Colonel Harrison spread through the barracks. For the first time since arriving at basic training, Sarah found herself the center of attention. Some recruits were impressed, others skeptical, and a few seemed resentful of her rapid advancement. Tommy Rodriguez, who had struggled with marksmanship throughout training, confronted Sarah after evening chow. So you think you're special now? He said loudly enough for others to hear. One good shooting performance and suddenly you're sniper material? Sarah looked at him calmly. I don't think I'm special. I just work hard to improve my skills. Work hard? Tommy's voice carried anger and frustration. Some of us have been shooting our whole lives. It's not fair that someone who never touched a gun gets to skip ahead. Several other recruits gathered around, sensing potential conflict. Sarah remained calm, but she felt the tension building. She had never sought attention or special treatment, but her abilities had set her apart whether she wanted it or not. I'm not skipping ahead, Sarah replied evenly. I'm completing the same training as everyone else. If I perform well, that's because I study and practice. Study? Tommy laughed bitterly. You think you can learn to shoot from books? Real shooting takes experience, not classroom theory. Sarah's quiet confidence seemed to inflame Tommy's anger further. He had grown up around firearms, had hunted with his father since childhood, and had expected to excel in military marksmanship training. Instead, he was struggling with basic accuracy while a girl with no experience shot perfect scores every day. The confrontation might have escalated, but Jessica Williams stepped between them. "Leave it alone, Rodriguez," she said firmly. "Sarah earned her scores just like the rest of us." Tommy glared at both women but backed down. The group dispersed, but the incident left tension in the air. Sarah realized that her success was creating problems she hadn't anticipated. She had simply wanted to do her best, but her abilities were affecting the morale and confidence of other recruits. The next morning brought a new challenge that would test more than just Sarah's shooting skills. The recruits were scheduled for their first stress fire exercise, a course designed to combine physical exertion with precision shooting under time pressure. The course began with a 2-mile run in full gear, followed immediately by a series of shooting positions at varying distances. The idea was to simulate combat conditions where soldiers might need to engage targets while physically exhausted and under stress. Most recruits struggled with the combination of physical exertion and precise shooting. Heart rates elevated from running made it difficult to steady their aim, and the time pressure led to rushed shots and poor accuracy. Scores dropped dramatically compared to calm-range shooting. Sarah completed the run in the middle of the pack. She was in good physical condition but not an exceptional athlete. However, when she reached the firing line, something remarkable happened. While other recruits gasped for breath and struggled to control their shaking hands, Sarah seemed to enter a zone of complete focus. She controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate through conscious effort. She had studied sports psychology and understood how mental discipline could overcome physical stress. One by one, her shots found their targets with the same precision she demonstrated during calm-range shooting. The final stage of the course required shooting from an unsupported standing position at 200 yards, one of the most difficult challenges in marksmanship. Most recruits missed the target entirely or managed only marginal hits. Sarah steadied her rifle, found her natural point of aim, and placed 5 consecutive shots in the center of the target. When the scores were tallied, Sarah had achieved another perfect performance. But more importantly, she had demonstrated the mental toughness that separated good shooters from great ones. Colonel Harrison, who had remained to observe the exercise, made detailed notes on his clipboard. After the exercise, Martinez pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "That was exceptional shooting under stress," he told her. "But I need to talk to you about something else." Sarah waited attentively. "Some of the other recruits are having trouble with your success," Martinez continued. "I heard about the incident last night with Rodriguez. You need to be careful not to let jealousy and resentment affect your training." "I don't know what to do about that, Sergeant," Sarah replied honestly. "I'm just trying to do my best." "I know that, and so does anyone with sense. But not everyone sees it that way. Some people think natural ability means you don't have to work for success. They don't see the hours you spend studying or the extra effort you put into every aspect of training." Martinez was right. While other recruits socialized or relaxed during free time, Sarah continued studying. She read technical manuals on ballistics, practiced dry fire exercises to improve her trigger control, and worked on physical conditioning to improve her stability and endurance. "My advice is to keep doing what you're doing," Martinez said. "But also remember that you're part of a team. Help others improve when you can. Share what you've learned. The best soldiers lift up their units, not just themselves." Sarah took the advice to heart. The next day, when Tommy Rodriguez struggled during marksmanship practice, she quietly offered to help. At first, he was suspicious and defensive, but Sarah's patient instruction and obvious expertise gradually won him over. She showed him subtle adjustments to his shooting position, helped him understand breathing control, and explained the mental aspects of marksmanship that many instructors overlooked. Within a week, Tommy's scores had improved dramatically. Word spread that Sarah was willing to help other recruits with their shooting. Soon, she was informally tutoring half the company during evening hours. Her quiet leadership style and obvious expertise made her a trusted instructor among her peers. The change in atmosphere was remarkable. Instead of resentment toward Sarah's abilities, the other recruits began to appreciate her willingness to share knowledge. She became known not as the show-off who made everyone else look bad, but as the expert who helped everyone improve. 3 weeks later, Colonel Harrison returned to observe final marksmanship qualifications. The improvement in overall company scores was dramatic. What had been an average performing unit was now one of the best in the training regiment. Sarah's own performance remained consistently perfect, but now she was surrounded by fellow recruits who had also achieved significant improvement. Tommy Rodriguez, who had initially been hostile toward her, was now shooting expert-level scores and helping other struggling soldiers. After qualification day, Harrison met with Sarah again. This time, their conversation would determine the next phase of her military career. "Congratulations on completing basic training," Harrison said. "Your performance has been exceptional, but I'm equally impressed by your leadership among your peers." "Thank you, sir. I'm prepared to offer you a slot in advanced sniper training. It's a 6-month course, extremely demanding, with a high washout rate. Are you interested?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir. Very interested." "Good. Report to Fort Campbell in 2 weeks. Bring everything you've learned here, because where you're going, the real challenge begins." 6 months later, Sarah stood on the most challenging rifle range she had ever seen. The advanced sniper training facility at Fort Campbell stretched across miles of varied terrain, designed to test every skill a precision marksman might need in combat. Rolling hills, dense woods, urban mock-up buildings, and wide-open fields created an environment where shots might be required at any distance from 100 yards to over a mile. The course had lived up to its reputation for difficulty. Of the 40 soldiers who had begun training 6 months earlier, only 12 remained. The others had been eliminated for various reasons. Some couldn't handle the physical demands, others struggled with the academic requirements, and many simply couldn't meet the extremely high shooting standards. Sarah had not only survived but excelled. Her natural shooting ability, combined with intense study and relentless practice, had earned her recognition as one of the finest sniper candidates the school had ever seen. But today would be her ultimate test, a final exercise that would determine whether she graduated as a fully qualified sniper. The scenario was complex and demanding. Sarah and her spotter, Corporal Mike Sullivan, had been inserted into a wooded area before dawn, with a mission to eliminate multiple high-value targets at various distances. They had limited time, challenging weather conditions, and the knowledge that instructors were watching their every move. Sullivan was an experienced soldier who had initially been skeptical of working with a female partner, especially one so young and quiet. But 6 months of training together had shown him that Sarah possessed skills unlike anything he had encountered in 10 years of military service. They moved through the woods with practiced stealth, using terrain and vegetation to mask their approach to the first shooting position. Sarah carried her rifle, a precision instrument she had learned to know intimately during training. Every component had been carefully adjusted and tested. She could disassemble and reassemble the weapon blindfolded, and she knew exactly how it would perform under any conditions. The first target appeared at 600 yards across a small valley. Through his spotting scope, Sullivan could see a figure moving between buildings in the mock-up village. The target would be visible for only brief moments as it moved from cover to cover. "Target acquired," Sullivan whispered into his radio. "Adult male, approximately 600 yards, moving east to west behind the red building." Sarah settled into her shooting position, adjusting the bipod legs to achieve perfect stability. She had learned to read wind conditions instinctively, noting the movement of grass and leaves to judge speed and direction. A slight breeze was blowing from left to right at about 5 miles per hour. "Wind call?" she asked quietly. "Left to right, 5 to 7 miles per hour," Sullivan confirmed after studying the environment through his scope. Sarah made minute adjustments to her scope and found her natural point of aim. The target appeared in her crosshairs as it moved between buildings. She would have only seconds to make the shot when it emerged into the open. Her breathing slowed to match her heartbeat. Years of training had taught her to enter a state of complete focus where external distractions disappeared and only the target existed. She felt the trigger under her finger, applying steady pressure as the target moved into position. The target emerged from behind a wall, moving at a steady pace across open ground. Sarah tracked the movement smoothly, leading the target slightly to account for its motion. At the precise moment when everything aligned, target position, wind conditions, rifle stability, she broke the shot. The rifle fired with its familiar crack, and Sarah immediately worked the bolt to chamber another round while staying in position. Through his spotting scope, Sullivan watched the bullet impact exactly where Sarah had aimed. "Hit! Center mass," he reported. "Target down." They moved quickly to the next position. Speed was crucial in the exercise, as real combat situations rarely allowed snipers the luxury of unlimited time. Sarah had learned to balance careful preparation with rapid deployment, ensuring that she could engage multiple targets efficiently. The second target was more challenging, a long-range shot at 100 yards across a wide field. At this distance, environmental factors became critical. Temperature, humidity, altitude, and wind all affected bullet trajectory in ways that required precise calculation. Sarah consulted the data book she had maintained throughout training. Every shot she had fired in 6 months was recorded with detailed notes about conditions and results. This information allowed her to make accurate adjustments for similar situations. Range 200 yards, Sullivan reported after careful measurement with his rangefinder. Target is stationary behind the blue vehicle. Sarah adjusted her scope for the increased distance and studied the conditions. The wind had picked up slightly, and she could see heat waves rising from the sun-warmed field that would affect bullet flight. She made careful calculations based on her training and experience. "Give me a minute to settle," she said quietly. Sarah had learned that patience was often the difference between success and failure at long range. She took time to ensure that her position was perfectly stable, her breathing was controlled, and her mental state was completely focused. Rushing a long-range shot almost always resulted in a miss. The target remained motionless behind the vehicle, presenting a difficult shot angle. Sarah would need to thread her bullet through a small gap to reach the vital zone. Any error in calculation or execution would result in a miss that could compromise the entire mission. She settled her crosshairs on the target and began her final preparation. Her breathing slowed to an almost meditative rhythm. Her heartbeat became steady and predictable. The rifle felt like an extension of her body, perfectly aligned with the target over 1,000 yards away. The shot broke cleanly, and Sarah held her position while the bullet traveled downrange. At 200 yards, the time of flight was nearly 2 seconds, long enough to wonder if everything had been calculated correctly. "Impact," Sullivan called out after what seemed like an eternity. "Dead center hit." They moved to the final position as clouds began to gather overhead. Weather was deteriorating, adding complexity to an already challenging exercise. The final target would test everything Sarah had learned about shooting under adverse conditions. The last target was positioned at 800 yards on a hilltop, partially concealed and presenting only a narrow exposure. Worse yet, a light rain had begun to fall, affecting visibility and potentially altering bullet performance. Many snipers would consider the conditions too difficult for accurate shooting. Sarah studied the target through her scope, noting the limited target area and challenging wind conditions. Rain was beginning to streak across her objective lens, requiring careful cleaning to maintain clarity. The target seemed to shimmer through the moisture-laden air. "Difficult conditions," Sullivan observed. "Do you want to wait for the weather to clear?" Sarah considered the option but rejected it. "In combat, you don't get to choose the weather. This is what we trained for." She had studied extensively how environmental conditions affected precision shooting. Rain could alter bullet trajectory slightly, and reduced visibility made target identification more difficult. But she had practiced in similar conditions many times during training. Sarah made adjustments for the weather and settled into her final shooting position of the exercise. This shot would determine whether she passed or failed the course. 6 months of intensive training came down to a single bullet fired under the most challenging conditions she had faced. The target was barely visible through the rain and gathering darkness. Sarah adjusted her scope for the failing light and studied the wind conditions one final time. Everything had to be perfect: range estimation, environmental calculations, shooting position, and mental preparation. She found her natural point of aim and began the careful process of breaking the shot. Her breathing controlled, heart rate steady, rifle perfectly stable. Through her scope, the target appeared as a small, indistinct shape against the darkening sky. The crosshairs settled on the target, and Sarah began her trigger press. Years of training had developed muscle memory that functioned even under extreme stress. The trigger broke cleanly, and the rifle fired into the gathering storm. Through the rain and fading light, Sullivan tracked the bullet's path with his spotting scope. The impact was clearly visible despite the weather conditions, a direct hit on a target that many experienced snipers would have found impossible to engage. "Hit," Sullivan reported with satisfaction. "Mission complete." As they packed their equipment and prepared for extraction, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Less than a year earlier, she had been a farm girl from a small town with no military experience. Through dedication, study, and natural ability she had discovered within herself, she had become one of the military's most skilled precision marksmen. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood with 11 other graduates at the sniper school graduation ceremony. Colonel Harrison presided over the ceremony, awarding each graduate their sniper badge and specialty designation. When he reached Sarah, he paused for a moment. "Private Chen," he said formally, "in 30 years of military service, I have rarely seen such exceptional performance. You have set new standards for what we expect from our precision marksmen." Sarah accepted her sniper badge with quiet pride. She had achieved something that few soldiers ever experienced: mastery of one of the military's most demanding specialties. But even more importantly, she had discovered capabilities within herself that she never knew existed. After the ceremony, Martinez approached her with a broad smile. "Congratulations, Sniper Chen. I knew from that first day on the range that you were something special." "Thank you, Sergeant. Your training made all the difference." "Where are you headed next?" Martinez asked. "Special Operations," Sarah replied. "They've requested me for a classified assignment overseas." Martinez nodded approvingly. "You'll do fine. Just remember, you're not just a sniper now, you're a teacher. Share what you know with others, just like you did in basic training." Sarah understood the responsibility that came with her new skills. She had been given exceptional abilities and training, and with them came the obligation to serve with honor and help others develop their own capabilities. 3 months later, Sarah found herself in a combat zone, putting her training to the ultimate test. The skills she had developed through study, practice, and dedication were now being used to protect her fellow soldiers and accomplish critical missions. The quiet farm girl who had enlisted to challenge herself had become one of the military's most valuable assets. But Sarah remained unchanged in fundamental ways. She was still quiet, still studious, still dedicated to continuous improvement. She had simply found her calling in a place she never expected, behind the scope of a precision rifle, where patience, intelligence, and steady nerves could make the difference between mission success and failure. The range officer's question from that first day, "Any snipers present?" now had a definitive answer. Sarah Chen had transformed herself from an unknown recruit into one of the finest snipers in military service, proving that exceptional achievement comes not from natural gifts alone, but from the dedication to understand, study, and perfect those gifts through relentless effort. Her story became legend at the training facility, inspiring future generations of marksmen to understand that mastery was achievable through dedication and proper application of fundamental principles. The silent girl had found her voice through the precision of her rifle, speaking a language that needed no words, the language of perfect accuracy when everything depended on a single, precisely placed shot. Years later, when new recruits asked about the greatest shooter ever to train at the facility, instructors would tell them about Sarah Chen, the farm girl who had never fired a rifle before military service but had become one of history's most accomplished snipers through the simple application of study, practice, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. Her legacy lived on in every perfect shot fired by those she had inspired to believe that any goal was achievable through proper preparation and relentless dedication to improvement.